Okay, I think it's now recording. Yeah, so we'll start with this topic, selectivity in organic chemistry. Okay, so why selectivity is important and why we are actually studying this particular aspect is something we're going to learn from this class. Okay, as I rightly defined in one sentence, selectivity we can call this as a curse and as an opportunity. Okay, we'll see why it's a curse and why it is an opportunity. Okay, first let us see why it is curse. Okay, so if you understand what is this curse, especially in with regard to organic chemistry is concerned, this will be very clear, are already clear to you if you would have by chance performed any reactions in an organic chemistry setup or an organic chemistry lab. By chance, some of you have done any reactions in a lab, not practicals. Any of you have done during your summer internship or so? Have you done any reactions?
Yes, sir.
Okay, who is this? Shaunak? Huh?
Yes,
Okay, Shaunak, what reaction you've done, and you tell us a little bit about your reaction.
sir. I've done reactions in Babu sir's lab.
Okay.
It was related to iron oxide nanoparticles and some amine with benzene rings reactions.
Fine. Okay, you have done the reaction. You know what is so-called thin layer chromatography, right? Don't worry. Even if some of you, some others don't know about this, you will get introduced to this chromatography aspects in your lab. Okay. I think you must have already got it, right, in your second year or so. No, chromatography.
No, sir.
Okay, I think then it will come in this particular session. Okay, but Shaunak, did you also do any chromatography, any purification?
Yes, sir. That was the major part of my work there.
Exactly. So this is where the discussion starts. See, to the remaining participants, what Shaunak said is actually valid. So most of the time that in a typical organic chemist does research in the lab spends in so-called purification of the compounds. What otherwise he or she typically employs the so-called technique chromatography. Okay, otherwise there are other ways of purifying compounds also. One other is distillation, for example. Okay, so okay, why we used chromatography to separate some compounds? Because Shaunak used chromatography because he got some mixture or he wanted to purify his compound, right, Shaunak? Right.
Yes, sir.
So why he wanted to purify? Because he got more than what he desired, or he got something other than what he desired. So he did a reaction and he got, in addition to his product, he got something else. That is one reason he must have performed chromatography or purification. Okay, other reason he must have done the purification is to separate from any residual unreacted reagents or unreacted starting compounds and any other types of impurities that may be associated with the product. Okay, now we'll go back to what we're talking about, the selectivity. Okay, so this is why I said a curse. Curse in the sense, organic chemists keep spending the time in purification because they didn't get what exactly they want. They got something more than what they want, or so they got something in addition to what they want. Okay, the reason it leads to so-called purification, and it also is the source of what is so-called lack of selectivity. Okay, for example, if at all Shonak's reaction was like he took one compound, he did some reaction, he got only one product without any side reactions, no need to separate anything. He just started with something and got product, done with it. So if situation would have been like that, he would not have opted to chromatography or he would not have opted to any purification technique, right? So that emphasizes, okay, why we are talking about selectivity in this particular class. Of course, if at all the case, maybe next class. Okay, and as the sentence says, opportunity. What is that opportunity? Okay, what is that opportunity? From this, we can take it as opportunity to improve a particular reaction. right? For example, Shonak himself has done a reaction. He took certain compound, did the reaction. He got 3 products, for example, mixture of 3 compounds. Now Shonak takes this as a challenge, and Shonak takes this as an opportunity and keeps on working with the reaction, different reagents, different conditions he explores, comes up with certain condition where he got only 1 product, right? That's what I mean to say by opportunity. Okay, so that's what, simply to understand what is the selectivity, the reason also why I mentioned. Yes, someone has some comment. Okay, why I mentioned correspondent as an opportunity. Okay, yeah. So when we call something selective, okay, there is another word now we got introduced to just in the next click, specific. Okay, so the specific versus selectivity you can understand this way. Okay, what Shonak has done, for example, if you would have got, this is what he got. For example, if he optimizes a reaction to get only 1 compound, that is where he can call his reaction as specific. Okay, so now once you talk of specific versus selective, okay, we have certain parameters to follow when we can call a reaction specific, when we can call a reaction selective. Okay, we need to be careful, we need to learn about this particular aspect. Okay, as I mentioned there, selective refers to mostly, almost, but specific refers to only when you got only 1 product. Okay, okay, so I'll tell you further what about this. Okay, for example, we have a case where we got 50-50%. We have a reaction, okay, where we got 50-50 of these two. Okay, this is called a selective reaction. Okay, let me further go forward. This is also a selective reaction when we have 80% to 20%, for example, 50%, 50%. Okay, yield, I am referring to here yields. Okay, okay, now I improve further to 5% to 95%. Can I call this as selective or specific?
Still selective.
It is still selective, right? Okay, okay, further. I have further, Shonak further optimized the reaction and he got 99 to 1. What about this particular scenario?
Mostly specific.
No, it is still selective because I can still see that it is selective up to 1%, right? Even 99% to 1 also is selective. When it is specific, only when I get to this particular scenario. That's the reason why I specially emphasized on this particular slide. You people, all of you need to understand when we can call reaction selective, when we can call a reaction specific. Specific is only when you got 1 compound. You can see the definition there. Only 1. You can see on the slide. As long as you see even 99 to 1. To that matter, forget about 99 to 1. Even for example, I have 99 to 99.5 to 0.5. This is also selective reaction. Okay, please understand. Okay, next question comes. Fine, you will agree with me that even though we get 99 to 1, it is still not specific. Okay, very well understood. And I am telling you that only you can have to call a certain reaction specific. You get exclusively 1 compound in the form of 100%, for example, or only 1. Okay, now next question. How do you identify how much I am getting? How do I know whether I am getting 99 to 1, I am getting 100 to 1 is even difficult to identify. Because how I can identify the difference between 99 to 1 versus 100 to 0? Right? If it is 80-20, 9-10, it's okay because it's isolable. The 10% of compound is isolable, 20% compound is isolable. But once you start going towards the other extreme, such as 99 to 1, 100 to 0, for example, how I need to now talk about selectivity versus specificity? Especially considering the error limits within the experimental setup, within the human errors that we have, how we have to overcome this issue, and how, in which instance I can talk of selectivity versus specificity. Any ideas on this?
So we can say about specificity only at the standard conditions.
No. No. Okay, given the condition, okay, if I have given you certain condition, how do you know that your reaction can be selective or specific? So you can only know when you actually got the product, when you actually isolated it, or by some other means. So now how I can determine between selectivity and specificity, what I should be doing according to you? Okay, here is where, okay, don't worry, here is where the real application of the analytical tools come into picture. Okay, what are those analytical tools we talk of? For example, NMR. You people heard of, right? NMR. You also learned something about NMR anywhere before?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Okay, very nice. So NMR is something that can tell you is it selective or specific. Okay, but it has limitation. I can tell you, it cannot distinguish probably between 99 to 1 and 100 to 0, because it also has certain level of sensitivity. Every instrument will have the so-called sensitivity. Okay, what other sensitive instrument that can give you even better information than NMR in such a scenario? I'm talking of selectivity versus specificity. Any feedback? Okay, no, don't worry. Otherwise, if not NMR, we have another tool called HPLC. Okay, we'll be learning about that probably in next class most likely. Okay, so-called HPLC, that is called high pressure liquid chromatography. Okay, HPLC can tell you whether your product, whatever that you obtain, is obtained selectively or obtained specifically. Okay, this tool can really help us. So among the analytical tools that we have, NMR and HPLC are something that can distinguish or that can provide us the information between a selective reaction and a specific reaction. Okay, but a pre-hypothesization, such as like someone told, just based on reagents, if I supply reagents, it doesn't necessarily mean that you get selective or specific. Of course, there are certain specific reactions which I'm going to talk about in this particular class. Okay, based on our earlier knowledge, you can say, but if you are doing a new reaction, we cannot just extrapolate our earlier knowledge and say it is selective or specific. Okay, fine. Up to there, I hope you understood the concept, what I was trying to emphasize, the curse versus opportunity, and I also defined to you when you can call a reaction selective, when you can call specific. Okay, now moving forward, as of selectivity versus specificity, in the context of organic chemistry, there are we'll learn about this selectivity from these particular reactions. Okay, I depicted a set of reactions. Okay, you can see. Let us go one by one. Okay, one reaction is where olefin is present, and it was converted to hydroxy derivatives. Okay, what is that reaction I should call in general? When olefin is converted to the kind of products that you see, what is that reaction?
Saturation of hydrocarbons.
Saturation is fine, but here I am introducing hydroxy on one side, proton on other side. So how I can call this reaction? I am basically adding a water molecule across the olefin. So how these kind of reactions are known as, are called as? Hydration. Yes, someone said Sankalp wrote, but Sankalp, ideally I would wish if you can speak, because it would be difficult for me to go to the chat box and see, because it occupies the screen also to keep open the chat box. So if you have a microphone, please talk. So please participate. All of you, I request you to please participate so that I feel happy. Otherwise, I'm already feeling that I'm talking to some wall. So at least if you people keep interacting, I feel good. So yes, so Sankalp wrote that it is called a hydration reaction. Yes, okay, hydration, or otherwise it can also be called as hydroxylation. Agree? All of you agree? Right? This can also be called hydroxylation reaction. Fine. But if you see that particular reaction, I showed you two products. Okay. One is where the hydroxy group is situated next to this R group. You see carefully these two products. Okay. This hydroxy group is connected to a carbon connected to this R group. On the other hand, hydroxy group is connected to the carbon that is away from this R group. Okay. So how we should refer to these two compounds? I mean to say, what is the relationship between these two? How we can call these two? They are looking very close. I mean, just the difference of hydroxy group here to there. Okay, just the position of that hydroxy group is different. How I can call these two isomers as?
Conformational isomers.
No. Any other wordings? How I should call these two compounds? Or relationship between these two compounds, I mean to say.
Positional isomer.
Huh?
Positional isomer.
Positional isomers, yes, positional isomers, but there is more appropriate word, a more scientific word, which is called as regioisomer. You heard of this anytime?
Yes, sir.
Right, okay. These are regioisomers. Otherwise, the selectivity aspect, because we're talking of selectivity, the selectivity aspect involved in the generation of these two compounds is called as regioselectivity. Okay, because you can understand by the word itself, it just they differ by the position, as someone said, yeah, by the position. But of course, you can also say positional isomers, but more scientific terminology to talk about this is regioisomers, or the aspect is what is so-called regioselectivity. Okay, up to there it's fine. Okay, next one. What I've done is I took an alkyne. Okay, so I'm moving to the second equation. I took alkyne and subjected to reduction. Don't worry about precise nature of these reagents. Okay, I subjected that to reduction or hydrogenation effect. Hydrogenation is a reduction reaction, right? So alkyne, I hydrogenated. I got two compounds, as you see here. Okay, one is where it is color coded. These two are on one side. These two hydrogens are one side, and another isomer where hydrogens are on the opposite side. How I should relate these two as?
Diastereomer.
Sorry?
Diastereomers.
Diastereomer, no. We will come to that, but in this case it is not diastereomer. What are these isomers?
Cis and trans forms.
Cis and trans, right? Cis and trans, right? Just as he said, positional isomers, we rename them as regioisomers. As you said, cis trans, you are close, but there is another scientific terminology, just like regioselectivity for these isomers. What is that?
Geometric isomers.
Chemoselectivity.
Very good. Someone said geometrical isomers, right? Someone
Yes,
also said
sir.
something else. What is that other one?
Chemoselectivity.
Sorry? Sorry, can you please repeat? Okay, yeah, so okay, let us move forward. These are called geometrical isomers. Okay, so geometrical isomers, but these are more appropriately called as stereoisomers. Okay, the isomers that differ by their stereoselectivity. Okay, as someone said, one is a trans stereoisomer, other one is a cis stereoisomer. Okay, otherwise they are also called geometrical isomers. Please start taking note in the sense, start taking impression of all these terminologies. You will keep coming across several other terminologies, so you please keep track of all this. Okay, already we got introduced to several terminologies in this so far. One is positional isomers versus regioisomers, cis trans versus geometrical isomers versus stereoisomers. Otherwise this aspect is called as stereoselectivity. Okay, now do you people know by chance? Okay, let us, I can move forward, but do you know how to distinguish between cis and trans? I gave you two compounds. how I can identify, or what technique I should use to confirmly say that particular compound is cis, another one is trans?
So the angle between the two
But
hydrogen atoms.
say I gave you a compound, but how do you go to angle level in a given compound? I gave you compound, say in a round bottom flask or in a test tube, I gave you a compound. Okay, but now how do I go to the level of angles in that particular compound? I don't know the structure, for example. What technique do you people know? What technique one has to use to distinguish between cis-trans isomers or geometrical isomers? It's a very famous interview question. If tomorrow, if you appear any interview, don't be surprised. You will be asked about this to test your fundamentals. What technique I need to use? Okay, this also here also comes the great help of NMR. Okay, NMR can distinguish between these two isomers. How? If you record NMR of these two compounds, for example, the J value or the coupling constant between those two protons. Heard of this coupling constant and J values? Okay, I don't know whether you, some of you said NMR, you know, so probably there you must have come across the so-called coupling constants. So which actually talks about, or which actually distinguishes between cis and trans. Okay, the further details we'll learn later, don't worry, even if you don't know at this stage. Because I just opened discussion to also see what extent you know, accordingly I can modify in future, or I can introduce the discussion surrounding this in future sometime. Okay, no problem. Otherwise, we're talking about selectivity. You now got introduced to so-called stereo selectivity. Okay, next one. I've done another reaction. Okay, you see this one. I took this ketone. Okay, I reduced. Okay, I supplied. Okay, let us consider I supplied a hydride. I got two compounds. You see these two? I got two compounds here. One is this, other one is this. Okay, so now how do I relate these two compounds?
Enantiomers.
Sorry,
Enantiomers.
isomer.
Enantiomers. Enantiomers.
Enantiomers, very good. Yes, okay. Enantiomers, okay. These two are enantiomers, and the selectivity aspect associated with these two enantiomers is what is called as enantioselectivity. Okay, so why they are enantiomers? You can see that enantiomers can be easily distinguished or easily identified rather by looking at them. You can see that the first structure, if I put a mirror in between, it looks like the other one. Okay, you can see that this hydrogen alpha configured, this hydroxy is beta configured. In this case, it is just reverse. Hydrogen is beta and hydroxy is alpha configured. Okay, so alpha beta terminology you can make out. Alpha, I mean to say, broken bond is called as alpha. This solid bond, okay, is called as a beta. Okay, so otherwise alpha beta also refers to above the plane and below the plane. Okay, so if I ask you to that extent, what is this hydrogen? By the way that it is shown in the structure, this hydrogen is above the plane or below the plane?
Below the
Below
plane.
the plane.
Right. Okay, whenever you see that a broken bond is present, indicates to you that that particular group is below the plane. Okay, what is this plane we are talking of? Okay, what is this plane? Okay, if we consider my hand as carbon, for example, where that R group, hydroxy and hydrogen are connected. Okay, the one, for example, if see, I'm showing you one more hand towards you. Okay, that is what is hydroxy group. Okay, hydroxy, what I mean to say by that, which is towards you. Okay, which is towards you, and a hydrogen is like this, it is away from you, right? Okay, so this is one way of looking at, this way and this way. There is another way to look at. Okay, if I put like this is one way of looking at it. See, above the plane, if you consider my hand as a plane, if hydroxy I'm placing, you see my hand, if that is a hydroxy group that is above the plane, okay, and if I put my hand below, that is below the plane, that is where your hydrogen is. Are you people understanding? There are two ways to show the plane. One is like this, where hydroxy and hydrogen are here. One is like this, okay, where hydroxy and hydrogen are here. Are you understanding? It's all about our view, how we are viewing, how we are seeing the molecule. So for this, whenever you want to understand the stereo selectivity aspects, remember, I'm telling you a simple, very simple principle, that is, you need a sense of imagination. Okay, without imagining the molecule in space, not on paper, not on the slide. Okay, you are given a molecule, for example, a compound such as this. Okay, you are given this molecule. Now you should have the sense of imagination. That means you have to take the compound from paper, pluck out of the paper and put it in the space. Okay, put it in the space and look at it. Okay, now hydroxy is above, okay, hydrogen is below, our groups are like this. So that gives you clear vision of the so-called, that's what we call as 3D space, right? These are all 3D, all organic compounds are, especially when we're talking of stereoselectivity aspects, they are 3D structures. Okay, of course, for convenience, we're writing on the plain paper, but they are all 3D structure. It requires to understand these, for example, stereoisomers. You need to be imagining the molecule. I told you what I told you. You need to take the molecule and imagine in space that you are as if you are an astronaut, and molecule is in front of you, and you are actually imagining which is towards you, which is away from you. Okay, fine. Up to there, don't worry. Even if it's not very clear, we'll be talking about these concepts repeatedly in the coming classes. When and where possible, we'll keep on discussing about it. Okay, so in this context comes, because we talked of enantiomer selectivity, in this context comes, as someone mentions, diastereoselectivity. Okay, so what is this diastereomer? What is the difference between enantiomer and diastereomer? Is very important to understand, right? Okay, just as we talked of enantiomer selectivity, we also need to know what is diastereoselectivity. Okay, can someone tell me what is diastereomer versus diastereoselectivity? Can someone? Okay, no problem. So we talked about okay, we call them as enantiomers because there is only one chiral center, and this chiral center exactly inverted in one isomer to the other isomer. So no problem. It's very happy for us, happy scenario for us to distinguish what are enantiomers and enantiomer selectivity. Okay. Now diastereomers. Okay, I'm just moving away. So diastereomers are when you have more than one chiral center. If, as long as you have one chiral center, no problem, there will be enantiomers only. There is no question of diastereomers and diastereoselectivity. Okay. When this terminology called diastereomers versus diastereoselectivity originates. Okay. For example, I have a compound something like this. Okay. I have that compound. I reduce this now using a hydride. All of you are able to see. Can you please affirm? Can you please confirm again? All of you are able to see?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Okay. Now you reduced. Now what happens? Okay. So here, this one we got from this compound. We reduced, say, hydride. Okay. We got these two enantiomers. Okay. Now I reduce this compound. I got this product. Okay. Now what is the difference? What is the difference? Now I got two stereogenic centers. Agree? Now we have two stereogenic centers, but if we now start writing the possible isomers, I think you may be knowing the what is so-called basic principle of deriving number of isomers. Okay, is dependent on the number of stereogenic centers. Here we have two stereogenic centers. One is this, other is this. Okay, actually, you know, this is the way that I have written is not correct. I have to write like this. Okay, see clearly. So how many are there now? These are 4. Okay, so 4 isomers that I can write from these two centers. I didn't do anything beyond what is supposed to be done. Okay, you can see that I just written all possible isomers originating out of these two centers. Okay, I got 4 isomers. These 4 isomers are the relationship in these 4 isomers is what is called as diastereomers. Okay, what is that now you understand from enantiomer selectivity versus diastereo selectivity, or enantiomers versus diastereomers? Enantiomers, okay, are when, for example, if you have one chiral center, you get only 2 enantiomers when you're generating a stereogenic center. But on the other hand, when you have more than one stereogenic center, as in this case, you in principle can get 4 possible isomers, as I mentioned in that circle, right? Those are called as diastereomers. Okay, if you see carefully, okay, I'm numbering here 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, if you see carefully, 1 and 4 are called as. Can you please tell me what the relation between 1 and 4? Compound 1 and 4 are enantiomers. You can see that all the centers are exactly inverted in this structure. You see, this is beta configured, this is alpha. This is beta, this is alpha. That means a beta compound is exactly written as or translated to alpha. These two are, so 1 and 4 are enantiomers. Okay. Now similarly, 2 and 3, you see this? This is beta, alpha. This is alpha, beta. Okay. These two are again, 2 and 3 are again enantiomers. Okay. Now, what are diastereomers? Okay. Rest are all diastereomeric pairs. What are rest? 1 and 2. 1 and 2 are diastereomers. Why? They differ by one stereogenic center. How? You see here. You see here, this is beta, this is beta. Again, this is beta, but this is alpha. That means at this center, these two are same. These two are beta configured, but this is different here. So these are called diastereomers. That means diastereomers are the ones which differ by a particular stereogenic center. Okay. So similarly, you can see that 3 and 4 are so here 1 and 2 are diastereomers. Similarly, 3 and 4 are diastereomers. Okay, so this concept is something that we could understand from this particular aspect. Even if you are not very clear at this stage, please don't worry at all. Okay, so we'll be talking about this in future also, because in the context of discussion, because someone talked about diastereoselectivity, I straight away thought of, though I didn't prepare seriously, I thought of telling you what are these diastereomers are. Okay, fine. So we talked about regioselectivity, stereoselectivity, and enantiomer selectivity. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to deal with these concepts in more detail. Okay, so first we'll talk of regioselectivity. Okay, so when we can call regioisomers, two compounds as regioisomers, or when we can call it is regioselectivity. It is when you see by definition or by the way that we can understand is when a starting compound forms two structural isomers. Okay, and among them one predominates, then you can call them as regioisomers. Okay, that means a reaction you're done, you got two isomers, but one of them predominates. Okay, then you can call regioisomer. If only one forms, what we should call that as specific. Okay, that we call as regiospecific reaction, or otherwise regiospecificity. Okay, because that's why you see the definition once again, as the last few words says, one predominates. Okay, so remember that. Then we have to call that as regioselectivity. Fine. Okay, now so the same reaction we're coming to, that is the hydration reaction or hydroxylation reaction. Okay, so these are regioselective reactions because they usually form mixture of compounds. Okay, mixture of compounds as you see here. So we took this olefin and treated with water in presence of acidic conditions. So you see this particular compound as a major isomer. This will be a minor isomer. If you see carefully, the hydroxy group in the major isomer is connected to a carbon where two R groups are connected, and hydrogen is attached to where one R group is connected. Okay, on the other hand, the opposite compound is minor regioisomer. Okay, now so to determine, we know this reaction of so-called hydrolysis or otherwise hydration, hydroxylation, however we call as. So what is that principle that guides us reaching or arriving at the major isomer that can form in a reaction? Do you know what is the principle that guides the formation of one isomer or the other in this particular reaction?
Markovnikov's rule and anti-Markovnikov's rule.
Right, exactly. Okay, so this is very easily understood based on the so-called Markovnikov's rule. Okay, what that Markovnikov's rule says. Markovnikov rule, what it says. So Markovnikov rule says the nucleophilic species are the negative part of a reactant or a reagent. I mean to say in this case, a negative part of the reagent adds to the carbon which is more substituted. You all agree? Okay, so that means when you are trying to add water, how you can envision water to be as it's a mixture of, or it's a combination of H plus and OH minus. Right, so what is the negative part or nucleophilic equivalent in that combination? What is nucleophile? OH minus, right? So the negative part is usually called nucleophile. Okay, so this nucleophile now, as per Markovnikov, adds to the carbon having more substitution, or in another way of talking about the same definition is a negative part of a negative part adds to the carbon having least hydrogens. Of course, both are same, right? If it is more substituted, the carbon is least. That carbon obviously will have least hydrogens, right? So both are same. Only the interpretation is different. So here it followed Markovnikov rule, and the reason why we observed this particular compound is major, and this is, as someone said. Sorry, who said that? Can I identify the name? Markovnikov, anti-Markovnikov?
So Jyoti.
Jyoti, okay, Jyoti told, okay, anti-Markovnikov and Markovnikov. This is what is called as anti-Markovnikov product. Okay, now it's very nice. I already told you, I tried to convince you that this is Markovnikov, this is my anti-Markovnikov. Did you think of how that rule originated first of all? why you have to accept the textbook saying that negative point adds to carbon having more substitution? Why you have to accept that? Can you tell me, can someone explain to me what is the real scientific reason behind that particular definition?
Sir, it has more plus I effect and
Plus psi effect. Okay, and then plus psi. Which one you're talking about? Plus psi effect? R groups or OH you're talking of?
sir, R groups to provide 2OH.
Okay, R groups have plus psi effect, but how that plus psi effect is influencing the incoming nucleophile?
Sir, it is increasing more positive charge over that carbon.
No. If it is plus psi, how it increases the positive charge? It should actually reduce the positive charge, right? Because it is donating the electron density. Plus psi charge means, right?
Sir, R group have more minus I effect, so carbon have more positive charge.
No, you're also wrong. Because she was correct. No, who said that? Hindu? Who is that? Jyoti. Jyoti said R group has plus psi effect is correct. Okay, but the interpretation of the R group doesn't lead to reducing the what is that called or increasing the charge, increasing the positive charge there. What is actually happening?
Hyperconjugation.
Hyperconjugation is fine, but still we didn't arrive at.
The intermediate carbocation is more stable.
Okay. Now we can combine all these things. Okay, right. Who said that? Sankalp, huh?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Sankalp said intermittent are a carbocation that presumably prevalent during the transformation is, now I am combining actually all of what you said. Okay, the carbocation that is prevailing during the reaction is actually stabilized by hyperconjugation by these R groups present. Okay, now what I have done is I just combined all of what you said. Okay, and now is it clear? Okay, I can explain further. Okay, I'll explain to you on the board more detail. It is important to understand how that rule came into actually. Okay, so okay, I have this olefin. I treated with H plus. Okay, when I treat with H plus, what happens? The charge migrates onto the electron deficient site, right? And thereby it leads to okay, it's very much understandable to us. Okay, now this cation, okay, this cation, of course, now you have water in the medium, H plus and water in the medium. Okay, now this cation, what is the nature of this cation? You people know the difference between primary, secondary, tertiary carbocations?
Yes.
Okay, what is this cation now?
Secondary.
Secondary.
Secondary cation. Huh? No, actually. This is actually tertiary. So this is secondary. If it forms this cation, that is, this is secondary. Okay, what
Sir,
is
can you write a bit bigger? We aren't able to see.
Oh, okay.
Just a bigger font.
You need bigger font?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. Okay, as of now, so somehow please manage. I'll try to do something from next class. Huh? I'll bring the computer probably further closer. Huh? Okay. So yeah, so this is a tertiary cation. Okay, and the tertiary cation, as we learned, this is a secondary cation and this is a primary cation. Okay, you write like this, right? 1 degree. To you people, some of the people call 1 degree, 2 degree. Please don't call that way. I heard from few people calling this as 1 degree, 2 degree. No, don't call that as 1 degree, 2 degree, 3 degree. You call them as primary, secondary, tertiary. Okay, you're only representing what is that you're talking as of primary, secondary, tertiary is concerned. Okay, So a tertiary cation is more stabilized. Why it is more stabilized? What is the factor that is contributing to the stability? Why a tertiary cation is more stable over secondary or primary? It is what is so called, as someone said actually sometime back, the phenomenon called as
Due
hyperconjugation.
to more.
Hyperconjugation. Okay, what is this hyperconjugation? Because if you have a tertiary cation, you can write more hyperconjugating structures compared to secondary or primary cation. Okay, what is this hyperconjugation? When you talk of hyperconjugation, you must have also heard of the so-called conjugation. Have you heard of conjugation? Okay, I'm sure you must have heard of conjugation. Okay, now if you relate, what's the difference between conjugation and hyperconjugation? Any idea? Whenever, remember, okay, it's a very important point I'm talking about. Whenever pi electrons are involved in a delocalization process, that is called conjugation. Are you all understanding? I'm repeating once again. Whenever pi electrons are involved in a delocalization process, that is what we call as conjugation. On the other hand, when sigma electrons are involved in a delocalization process, that is what is called hyperconjugation. Simple and easy to remember. All of you got it? Okay, I'll show you what I mean to say by that. Okay, for example, I have this diene. Okay, this is a conjugating structure. This is a conjugating structure because we can write a conjugation something like this, leading to the formation of this one. This is called conjugation. What we have done here, we moved the pi electrons, or we primarily delocalized pi electrons across the system, and we arrived at the so-called delocalized structure. Okay. On the other hand, what I'm talking to, this is what is called as conjugation. I'm talking to you now about hyperconjugation. When we have to call hyperconjugation, when sigma electrons are, what is the sigma? What is the sigma electrons? Whenever you are utilizing electrons from, for example, CH sigma bond and CC bond sigma bond, okay, these electrons involved, okay, in the bonding process, and these electrons contribute to delocalization process, that is what is called as hyperconjugation. Okay, so for a tertiary cation, you can write more hyperconjugating structures, or there can be more delocalization, or another way of talking about is there can be more stability induced by more amount of sigma electrons present when the same scenario compared to secondary or primary structures. Okay, the reason tertiary cations are more stabilized. Okay, I'm sure you must have studied this in your earlier classes. Okay, simply textbooks talk of primary is less stable, secondary is okay, fine, tertiary is more stable. Okay, but these details they don't talk of. Okay, they will only say hyperconjugation, but what is that how hyperconjugation is actually contributing? Okay, that is what I just mentioned about. Okay, you can, if you have any question further on this, I can explain further how to write hyperconjugating structures also I can explain, but I somehow didn't want to deviate. Okay, I expect that you know these aspects, but otherwise here let us quickly conclude by talking about these regioisomers. When we hydrated, by following the Markovnikov rule, we got the major isomer in the form of this hydroxy compound, and minor isomer formed by following the so-called this product otherwise can be called anti-Markovnikov product. Okay, why it followed Markovnikov rule is because it doesn't mean that the reaction doesn't know Markovnikov, it doesn't obviously know the Markovnikov rule. Okay, you please understand. Okay, it only knows that it is generating a cation that is tertiary in nature, that is stabilized, and there your nucleophile is approaching and reacting onto the more stabilized cationic site. That's how you're getting the major regioisomer. Okay, another way of hydroxylating double bonds is what is mentioned in the next equation. You see the next one, that is the reaction is called as hydroboration oxidation process. Okay, don't worry about further details. We are definitely talk. This is one of the most important reactions in organic chemistry. We're going to talk about the details of the mechanism of this reaction. Okay, but otherwise, as of now, why I place this reaction at this particular juncture is that you can see how the product distribution is switched. Okay, what are major isomer observed under acidic conditions, acidic hydrolysis or hydration under acidic conditions is now you see that has become minor. That product has become minor, and which is anti-Marconic of got major. Okay, so we'll talk about the mechanism. As I said, don't worry at this stage why this is major. This also follows, let me tell you, this also follows Marconic rule, but there's a trick. Okay, that trick I'll talk to you all in the coming classes sometime, where we are going to talk about this hydroboration oxidation process. Okay, so probably I'll stop here. Okay, and if you have any questions, please ask me now. We'll spend 2-3 minutes to talk about any concerns you have. Otherwise, we will actually close. Any questions from anyone? Please don't hesitate. I didn't see great participation. Seriously, if you participate more, I can tell you I can be a better teacher than what I am.
Sir, how you concluded that selectivity is a curse? I still
Yeah,
didn't understand.
because I told you that. See. Okay, let us talk on this particular reaction. Okay, curse is because I have done a reaction. Okay, let me move next. Okay, I have done this reaction. For example, I'm getting two products. Okay, major and minor. But if you would have given me only this product, I'll be obviously happy, right? Okay, curse in the sense, don't take real curse, but curse in the sense something that is not favorable. Okay, so if I would get a reaction where only one product forms, I would be more happy than getting two products, right? In organic synthesis, what happens is getting more products, we don't be happy. Okay, in real life, we get more, we'll be happy, but not in synthesis, right?
Sir,
So
but
yeah.
in general, mostly reactions include more than one product.
Right. Hmm. So that's why that indicates that the reaction is not specific enough, or otherwise this reaction is not selective enough. The reason why you are getting more than one product, you see, one product is not necessarily always dependent on selectivity aspect. It also depends on several mechanistic considerations. Okay, we'll talk about this case by case. It need not necessarily go by what we are seeing on the slide right now. Okay, one reaction under one condition, there can be other mechanisms that may be operating. Okay, which leads to more product distribution. Are you understanding, Jyoti?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And sir, how did you say that when a reaction is proceeding, is it selective or specific?
Mm-hmm. Oh no, when reaction is proceeding, you cannot know. Only after isolating the product. See, when we can know what happened in a reaction, obviously after seeing the products, right? After characterizing the products, right or not? We have done a reaction. While reaction is going on, while we plan the reaction, we don't know what's going to happen. While reaction is going on, also we don't know. Only when products are formed, our products are formed, then after characterizing I mean to say, with whatever the analytical tools available, then we can say if one product formed, only one formed, by following the techniques that I talked to you earlier. For example, NMR and HPLC tells you that no, Jyoti, you are very lucky, you got only one product. Now you will be happy to say that my reaction is specific. But say I got two products, my NMR says that my NMR shows two products or three products. I'm not as lucky as you are, and I can now say that my reaction only selective. Okay, why this happens is something that we are going to further learn about in this course. Okay, these are mechanistic consideration, reagent based, substrate based. Okay, and competing reactions that can happen on the same substrate. There can be several reasons why you get more number of products.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, any other questions, please? Okay, one concern I heard from you people is the board, the structures you are not able to see. Is that a concern, or only that particular structure you couldn't see? Now, whatever you're seeing on the board, is it fine, or you think it needs to be done? Something needs to be done about it?
So you could increase the font size so
Okay.
that it's more clearly visible.
Okay. I need to write a little bigger, right?
Yes.
Okay, fine. Okay, from next class we'll do that. Is that fine? So shall we close here today?
Yes, sir.
Okay then. Thank you. See you tomorrow.